I'm Dr. Dave Janda. Welcome back to the Insider Insight Show. I am honored to have back with me someone who is a very dear friend. And when it comes to folks that have served in political office or are serving in political office, you are looking at the exception to the rule, that being Senator Pat Colbeck, when it comes to folks that are in the business of politics. I've known Pat for many, many years. He is one of the most honest, caring, considerate, and intelligent people that I've ever come in contact with, which automatically should prevent him from being in the world of politics. He's also someone who's not bought and paid for. Again, another reason why he's such an enigma when it comes to someone being involved in politics. His background is incredible. The good news, he's not a lawyer. The other good news is that he's an aerospace engineer. He obtained his bachelor's and master's degree in aerospace engineering from the University of Michigan. And he served 2 terms as in the state of Michigan Senate and actually was as opposed, he's a Republican. He had as much opposition to his very insightful programs that he was trying to implement through the state of Michigan government. He was opposed as much by the R's as he was the D's, which goes back to something I've always told you. There's one political party, in particular DC, but it's universal, and they're all owned by the same syndicate. And that's what we're all up against. And fortunately, we have Senator Pat Colbeck to be on our side, freedom side. Pat has taken his science, data, and engineering background and funneled it into many different directions, one of which is election integrity, something that we don't hear much about in the bought off lamestream fake media or frankly in the independent media. But Pat is one of our countries, if not the country's most incredible scientific mind looking and engineering mind looking at election integrity from a foundational level, a data-driven level that no one else is doing. And that's what we're going to discuss today. It's my privilege, pleasure, and honor to welcome back Senator Pat Colbeck. Pat, welcome back.
Yeah, Dave, thank you very much for the kind introduction. Just remember, I'm not alone. There's a lot of other what I call meddling kids working with me in the background to help process all that data.
So, Pat, give us the status of election integrity because there's some many moving parts people are unaware of. There's the federal side of this, looking at this, but also at the state level side, the independent side. So take us where are we with election integrity?
All right, well, I'm going to work backwards from a recent event that just happened this week. We had Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson come and testify before the Michigan House Oversight Committee. And I can tell you from a political perspective, the odds of her coming before the Michigan House Oversight Committee, which is led by Republicans, because Republicans are now in the majority, and Jocelyn Benson is a Democrat, and she's running for governor. The fact that she felt compelled to come out before the Michigan House Oversight Committee and testify instead of just saying talk to the hand like she's done with a lot of other things up to this point indicates that she's feeling some heat and she's feeling some pressure. And I can tell you a lot of these meddling kids in Michigan and all across the country are zeroing in on this fraud and how it was perpetrated and some of her financial dealings and some of her other shady dealings that she's feeling the heat. And so that's just the latest manifestation, and you don't need to hear about it in the media for it to be effective. The key thing is that these people that are feeling the heat know about it, and you can kind of read the tea leaves just by the reactions of certain individuals like her being willing to testify. So, but if you flash back earlier than that. Let's go back to January 20th and 2021. Sorry, not 2021, 2025. Um, we had Donald Trump was inaugurated.
Mhm.
And what did he do? That first day he was inaugurated, he signed a couple dozen, I think, executive orders. And I should point out that he signed those executive orders in the full light of day. One in an arena, another one in front of all the media in the Oval Office.
Mhm.
There's no way you could accuse him of using, let's say, an auto pen during the signatures that he applied to those executive orders. It was very, very public. And among the orders that he signed on day one were about eight or so that were directly or indirectly related to election fraud. And they didn't necessarily have the word election fraud in it, and you kind of have to know the inside baseball to get a feeling for it. But trust me, they were all about election fraud, and the fact that he's got his mugshot on the outside of the Oval Office tells you he hasn't forgotten what happened in 2020. So, just a couple examples of some of the executive orders that he issued. One was designating cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. Now, what does that have to do with election fraud? Quite a bit, actually. If you paid attention to Jacqueline Brager's testimony before a joint session of the Arizona House and Senate, she testified as to how the, I think, was it the Sinaloa cartel was involved in a mortgage fraud scheme where politicians such as Katie Hobbs, who was Secretary of State, and then became governor, supposedly, of Arizona. She took out three to four refis on her home in the same year, which looks kind of suspicious,
Yeah.
maybe like a money laundering activity. And they also provide a lot of evidence around election chicanery, if you will, at that testimony. Another example of a cartel that connected to elections is Cartel de los Soles out in Venezuela. That's the essentially it stands for the Cartel of the Generals, essentially in Venezuela. They have ties to Smartmatic, and the Smartmatic bones connected to the Dominion bone, ES&S bone, all the U.S. Electronic voting system manufacturers. So they are very much, interested in zeroing in on what's going on in the elections, and you may not know about these connections. And then there's another one that I'll point out that I think is very interesting. So one of his in his executive orders on day one, he was talking all about getting rid of DEI and getting back to basics in governance and making sure we're serving everybody. Well, you know why he went after the DEI crowd? Well, we just so happen to have a bunch of whistleblower videos from before the 2020 election where the pronoun crowd that worked in the federal government as either employees or contracts were actually planning the real insurrection um, in the 2020 election. They were plotting on how to take over government buildings. They were seeing who would break the windows, and they were actually running through all kinds of simulations that, frankly, would have made any military planner proud. And so the folks that were engaged in all those activities were all the pronoun crowd. They all had the he, him, they, their, whatever it is on their diagram. So those are just two subtle indications that right on day one, he was headed in the right direction and focused on election integrity. And since then, there's a lot of other examples we can share as well.
Well, one of them was an executive order that he signed, or a proclamation, or a
Yep.
document in the Oval Office, right?
Yes.
And it was directed at a dude by the name of Chris Krebs, the
Yes.
former head of an entity called CISA. And I'll let you go through the why
Yeah.
this is important and who these players are. And it was just a pure coincidence
Yeah.
that your best friend and my best friend, and I say that very facetiously because we've both been targeted by this, I'll be kind, witch. Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, happened to be in the Oval Office
Yeah.
when when he signed this document calling for the investigation of CISA, their involvement in the 2020 election fraud, and in particular the guy who ran it, Chris Krebs. Educate our listeners on this, Pat, and again, give us your 2 cents about how coincidental it was that good old Gretch the witch was there.
Well, it certainly looked like she was just playing hide and go seek in there, and she thought she could hide behind some binders. I mean, that's probably one of the most embarrassing political moments since Marco Rubio drank a glass of water during the debate,
Yeah, right.
and I would say it's a lot more embarrassing. So yeah, Chris Krebs. Just a little bit of background. Chris Krebs was the head of CISA. So you remember in the wake of the 2020 election, Krebs is famous for saying that we had the most secure election in American history,
Right.
right? And Trump said, that did it, you're fired, and gave him the boot right then and there. Well, CISA is the Cyber Infrastructure Security Agency, something along those lines. And they're the government agency responsible for monitoring all the internet traffic effectively. And they're also the ones who contract out for an organization called the EI Isaac Center, or the Election Integrity Information Sharing and Analysis Center, that's run by another organization called the Center for Internet Security. Now, CISA and CIS often get confused, but I'm telling you, CIS is the one that was under contract by CISA to monitor the EI Isaac Center. And what this EI Isaac Center was effectively a wiretap of the election systems in all 50 states.
Hmm.
And they are also the organization that was at the center of the Election Integrity Partnership, which was the subject of a congressional report on the weaponization of government that highlighted that they were responsible for the censorship of everyday Americans in partnership with big tech and big media. Right. So, anybody who wanted to talk about election fraud, if you're wondering why it's kind of quiet out there, is because they had some lasting effect on chilling the atmosphere about talking about the elections. And so this is Chris Krebs is kind of at the center of that, and I think it's really important when you look into that executive order as written is that he got rid of all of his security clearances and the security clearances of all of his friends as
Hmm.
well, the ones that he was working with. And that includes Alex Stamos, who's with the Stanford Internet Observatory. And when you take a real close look at this election integrity partnership, and by the way, their most famous censorship activity was that of Hunter Biden's laptop's origins. They were
Right.
the ones that ran cover for the story of the 51 quote unquote intel officers that said that it was Russian disinformation. Well, we all know the truth now. Of course, we knew the truth then too, but the general public didn't know that this was just a an operation, a disinformation operation by those 51 intel ops to go off and take people off the trail of the fact that Joe Biden was on the take from the Chinese Communist Party to the
Hmm.
tune of, what is it, $31 million, 10% for the big guy. All that stuff was wrapped up into that Hunter Biden scandal. And what people don't realize is that that censorship apparatus all by itself was responsible for swaying enough votes
Hmm.
to shift the election results into a mode that gave Joe Biden the keys to the White House. And I will not call him president because
No,
he was
I
never
wouldn't
the president.
never.
But here's the deal. They did a poll after the election. They said, all right, they polled Democratic voters and they said, if you knew um, back before the election what you know now about Hunter Biden's laptop, would you have voted for Joe Biden? And 9% of them said no. Now, it should have been 100%, right? If you value our
Well,
sovereignty in any way, shape, or form, and
if
you're
there
not
was any
treasonous. But
rationality.
anyway, it was 9%. The maximum uh, margin of victory given to Joe Biden in the 2020 election in the battleground states was 2.8%, and that was in our home state of Michigan. So it's easy to say that that one piece of disinformation
Right.
coming from this election integrity partnership was responsible for shifting the election results. That's before you consider the mules that they talked about in 2000 mules. That's before you consider electronic voting systems that me and my friend Mike Lindell zero in on quite a bit. It was just on the disinformation campaign. And so when we paint the picture of what's happening right now in America and what President Trump and his administration is doing, I honestly look at the stakeholder list for the Election Integrity Partnership as kind of the post office version of the most wanted list.
Hmm.
And I think Trump is systematically checking the box off of everybody that was involved in that partnership, including Chris Krebs and Alex Stamos. And just to give you a quick example of what I mean by that, he defunded the Center for Internet Security, which is
Hmm.
responsible for the EI Isaac Center. The Global Engagement Center out of the State Department was zapped right within the first few weeks of Rubio assuming that office. He's went off and taken out the CISA. So that was the subject of that respective
Right.
executive order we're talking about. He went off and targeted Harvard, who was up there with the Belfer Center. He went off and targeted Stanford with the Alex Stamos through CISA because he has a connection to the Stanford Internet Observatory. And of course, he's never been a big fan of big media. And when you come to big tech, good old his friend, I think he's still a friend. We'll see. Elon Musk, had kind of got in there and exposed all the Twitter files that was going on. So I think what we're seeing is a systematic takedown of this budding Ministry of Truth that Biden and Obama and all these bad guys tried to implement into federal government. And I think that should give everybody a lot of reason for hope.
So, Pat, when you look at the 2020 election, and there's myriad of elections we could look at, obviously, where there's problems, right?
Yeah.
Um, some people will say, "Well, that's that's water over the bridge. That's old news. We can't go backwards. We should be looking forwards." And I've gotten a lot of heat for saying no, because if we don't fix the criminality that was done, it will keep being done in various forms. Because my take is that 2020 election was a multifactorial, multi-level voting fraud operation, not just a simple one level deal. This was many different levels, whether it was the mail-in voting or the machines or you name it, right? The files, the voter rolls, the so do I have that wrong?
No, not at all. And matter of fact, let's just use a practical example of why you're right. Right in the wake of the 2020 election, a lot of the folks with R's next to their name as well as D's were saying, move on.
Yeah.
Let's just make sure 2022 is secure. And what happened in Michigan? We had the House and the Senate in Michigan. By we, I mean the Republican Party, had the House and the Senate. And by the end of the 2022 election, we had lost the Senate for the first time in decades. We had lost the House. We had lost the Attorney General, the Secretary of State, the and governorship. So they swept the board on everything and put in a lot of egregious constitutional amendments into our Constitution. So no, you can't sit there and just look forward. And I'll tell you a recent example in 2024. I'll tell you the one good things because we've got all these meddling kids looking at the data now, and I got good buddies, Tim Vetter, Fonny Montravati, and some other folks out at the Election Integrity Force that were monitoring a report in the 2024 election. And by the way, Michigan just adopted this stupid early voting system, which is just another mechanism for chaos and fraud. But anyway, but with that, they presented what's called a daily ballots cast report throughout the early voting period in the election leading up to the general election in November of last year. And this daily ballots cast report was indicating that the same voter ID was casting multiple votes. And folks, our data geeks, our own Michigan Doge team, if you will, they were looking at this information and on October 28th, these illegal votes, these illegal multiple votes, tallied a total of 125,428 illegal votes.
Right.
Just for reference purposes, the margin of victory given to Trump in Michigan in the 2024 election was 80,000 votes approximately.
Mhm.
So we think we caught Jocelyn Benson with her hand in the cookie jar. And because the day after this was brought up to the media and brought out, thankfully, on social media, because we can't get it out through
No.
traditional news sources, but it created enough heat. We connected with the RNC, got the word out to them. They talked to the Secretary of State as well. And then the next day, lo and behold, there was only one illegal vote, which is still too many, but still, it was obvious that they went off and scrubbed the data, and I think we honestly stopped them from stealing Michigan for the presidential election. I think they took a lot of the down ballot stuff that was going on once they thought that their attention was off of them, but we've been monitoring that as well. So No, you have to keep looking. We do not have a secure election system right now.
No.
And from my perspective, as long as we have these electronic voting systems with zero transparency, zero ability to examine what's going on, we're never going to have a truly honest election. I honestly think Trump did make it too big to rig in 2024. And the numbers support that. The voter turnout on our side in particular was higher than previous elections, which is a good deal. But ultimately, we do not have a secure election system, so we still have to be vigilant.
Well, in fact, Pat, you and I are both based near the People's Republic of Ann Arbor.
Yeah,
And what the zealots say, well, if the system is so bad, how did Trump win in 2024?
yeah,
And the point is, Pat, many people are not cognizant of the fact that and you already brought this up here in Michigan, but they did try to steal it in 2024. It's just that they couldn't pull it off
no,
because there were enough people like yourself and your teams watching around the country that they didn't quite pull it off this time. How, other than these early voting deal that you guys caught them on, what else were they trying to do that was picked up in trying to steal the 24 election that didn't quite work out?
it's the voter rolls. So it's manipulation of the voter rolls. I mean, so what we've seen is a pattern of them inflating the voter rolls right before the election and then scrubbing the voter rolls after the election so you can't go off and check their math. And Jocelyn Benson has issued decrees after the election, essentially cover-up decrees, where she orders the destruction of poll book data. Now, poll books are where you get your audit trail.
No.
They show where the poll worker is checking in somebody and giving them a ballot at the precinct level all across the state. And by destroying that record, it makes Jocelyn Benson's data, which is a qualified voter file, the de facto data source for voting history. So that's one of the key mechanisms. I'll tell you, that voting history should not change at all from the time that it's entered into the qualified voter file within 7 days of the election till 5 years afterwards, which is the required retention period. And so, but what we're finding is that the voter history for a given election, like the 2020 election,
Mhm.
changes every single month. That should never happen. To
No.
this day, if you were to go off and ask for the qualified voter file and the voting history for the 2020 election, what you will find is that there's over 350,000 fewer voters than ballots cast in that election. And just so you know, the margin of victory attributed to Joe Biden was 154,188 votes. That's rather significant, I would think. In
Yes.
other
You
words,
don't
the
have to
whole
be an
state
aerospace engineer. No.
is unbalanced, and that should be an embarrassment for Jocelyn Benson and crew. But the media never brings that up. So when people bring up that 2024, they want to question the results there. I say, bring it on.
Yeah, that's
I
right.
would love to give the 2024 election, if you excuse the remark, a proctology exam. I
Mhm.
want to go off and look at not just the ballots. I want to look at the machines. I want to look at the voter rolls. I want to look at the voter history. Let's open it all up. And they don't want to do that, you notice. There's only one side that's interested in full transparency, and that's us. And I was consistent back in 2016 when Trump won Michigan. I said, open it up. Let's call for an investigation. Something didn't seem right
Mhm.
because of what we saw in the city of Detroit. And we actually had an analysis done by the Secretary of State at the time, Ruth Johnson. She identified at least 31 counts of voter fraud from the data she was able to obtain without subpoenas. And Bill Schuette didn't do anything with it. But we should have investigated then. And I had Catherine Engelbrecht ready to come in. So, to your point earlier, ours, as much as D's, depend on this system to go off and anoint who the next candidates are.
Well, so at times, well, a lot of the time, currently, I would be hard pressed to tell people, we got the White House, the Freedom Movement has the White House, the House, and the Senate at the federal level. I'm not seeing much action on many fronts, Pat. Now, maybe I'm being
Yeah.
a bad guy here, but in particular on the election integrity front, why hasn't the Department of Justice stepped up and said, you know what, let's do a forensic dissection of the 2024 election. Let's do that.
Yeah.
I see Pam Bondi doing a huge number of interviews on Fox News every day. I'm not seeing any. There's nothing I'm really seeing out of the Department of Justice, but on the election integrity, it's been nothing. Am I missing? Am I just not clued in that they're doing a bunch of stuff that they're talking about that I'm not hearing?
There is a lot of stuff going on. First of all, let's keep in mind that the FBI and the Department of Justice was probably the most infested two departments or agencies in the federal government with all the pronoun crowd that did the videos before the election talking about how to conduct a real insurrection.
Mhm.
So they've arguably got the biggest hill to climb. And but I will submit that there are some stalwarts in that department. You got Alina Habba, but also you got Ed Martin in particular,
Ed
who's now
Martin's
heading up the weaponization of
he's
government
great.
and the auto pen
Ed Martin's great.
investigation. Yeah, so there are some good people there. They don't know who they can trust right now.
Yeah.
But if you want to see an example of the fact that we think that they've cleaned up most of the bad actors, or at least identified them, so they can navigate around them, I think when President Trump called for a special prosecutor in the to investigate the 2020 election, that for me, I take that as a signal saying, guys, I think he's seeing the light at the end of the tunnel in DOJ land, because once you appoint that special prosecutor, there's a lot of folks involved in the DOJ that are going to be plugging into that, and and so you've got to make sure that you've got a pretty good tight-lipped organization for that. So I'm seeing changes there. The one thing I haven't seen, and I'll put that in as a caveat, that concerns me a little bit is that Pam Bondi could have appointed somebody to chair the Office of Public Integrity, and which is a department inside the Department of Justice. And why this organization is so important is because if you read the DOJ guide on how to prosecute election fraud, all roads lead to the Office of Public Integrity. They
Mhm.
determine when a grand jury can be formed. They determine whether or not the FBI can have special investigative powers for their investigations. And right now, it looks like it's still populated with the old guard, if you will.
Yeah.
So that is a caveat. But having said that, maybe they're just going around them. I don't know.
Well, I have my
I
concerns.
can tell you
I have my
that
concerns.
here's another big hope. You know, Mike Lindell, my friend Mike Lindell's met with President Trump on multiple occasions. I can tell you the first time he met with him after becoming president, Mike gave him an extensive care package on uh, recommendations as to what can be done, and provided all the supporting data and evidence associated with it. And President Trump was very receptive of that. And I can tell you, if somebody knows what Mike handed off to the president, that the president has been systematically checking the box on everything that was provided in that package. And I can't say that it was as a result of us providing the package, but it could just be coincidence, and he had the same idea and was going to go off and do it, which is fine by me. But I can tell you, on my bingo card, he's checking off a lot of the boxes right now.
Are there any coming attractions you can talk about that are on that bingo card?
Um, well, I mean, getting rid of the electronic voting systems is kind of the when we get to yell bingo. And there are some of the executive orders, like the one that he did on March 25th, and frankly, even the CISA order,
Mm-hmm.
have gotten into the point where we are starting to examine whether or not federal government has identified evidence of these electronic voting systems being compromised. And you may recall DNI Tulsi Gabbard and her statement saying, "Nope, these electronic voting systems no good," and that was done over a month ago,
It
coming out of one
was a
of his
cabinet
cabinet
meeting.
meetings.
It was a cabinet
Yeah.
meeting.
So there's like these little drips that indicate things are moving in the right direction. Now, those could be just drips to mollify folks like me that are desperate to see the action. But I don't think that's the case. And I've got enough contacts inside the White House and Inner Circle that gives me an indication that there is forward momentum, and we're just looking for the right time.
And Pat, when we talk about the voting machines, there was a case down in Georgia with testimony in front of a judge by the name of Totenberg.
Yeah.
If that name sounds familiar, it's because her sister works for NPR, the judge. But at that trial, please tell me if I'm off on this, they actually looked at a machine that was used in the 2020 election. And in the courtroom, live, in front of the judge, that same machine that was used in the 2020 election was hacked and votes were changed in real time in front of the judge. And the word I heard was it took the judge's breath away. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that was Professor J. Alex Halderman with a pen hit the reset button, and when the machine rebooted, you could go around the normal security protocol and interject whatever code you wanted to interject. And we've known this for quite some time. We've got documented cases of vulnerabilities being used to flip votes in like Williamson County, Tennessee. Election Assistance Commission actually, put out a report on it and they said, well, we don't know what happened, but they appear to have fixed it. Well, if you don't know what happened, how do you know if they fixed it?
Mhm.
So it's the vulnerabilities are there. And frankly, if this was before 2020, all the Democrats would be saying
Oh, yeah.
exactly what I'm saying.
Right.
And so they put out documentary after documentary, Kill Chain, Hacking Democracy, all that kind of stuff. It was no secret. They put out reports back in January of 2020. Dominion CEO John Polis was called in to testify as to supply chain issues with our electronic voting systems because almost all the significant portion of the components in our electronic voting systems come from China. And we know from Bloomberg and elsewhere that China loves to put in these little back doors onto the motherboards of these systems. Most recently, we heard about their back doors being implemented in the power inverters for solar panels here in the U.S. So they're very sneaky about making sure they have access to everything. That includes our voting systems. And
Mhm.
we have internal emails from obtained by a good friend of mine in Michigan, a hero, Sheriff Darleaf,
Yeah, I
and
was about to talk about.
he's been collecting a lot of internal emails from Dominion and making sure everybody knows about them. And one of these emails highlights that John Polis, after that testimony before the United States Congress,
The CEO of Dominion.
yeah, the CEO of Dominion commissioned a report to identify what how many of their components were actually manufactured in China. And the report came back on their internal emails that we never saw them talking about in public, said that 48% of the components for their ImageCast precinct, which is their precinct-based tabulator, came from China. And if you look at, and this is where things get interesting, this is where I think things get hopeful for the idea of getting rid of electronic voting systems, is that in fiscal year 19 and fiscal year 23, the National Defense Authorization Act had provisions in it to prohibit the import of uh, systems with components from China for critical infrastructure systems. And thanks to Barack Obama, as one of his last acts before leaving office in January of 2017, he designated election systems a critical infrastructure. Now, he did it for bad reasons. He wanted his buddies at
Mhm.
the E.I. Isaac Center to do their wiretaps of the election systems in all 50 states. But with the National Defense Authorization Act, now we've got a mechanism that says that right now, none of these systems, according to that law, the federal law, should have been imported for use in American elections. Anytime past 19 and 23, they shouldn't be out there. Those systems should be gone. And so, one of the things Trump's been calling for in that, I think it was a March 25th executive order, is a redefinition of the voting system guidelines that the Election Assistance Commission uses to certify those machines. And then all machines that are used in future elections have to comply with those certs. And so that essentially hits the reset button on the whole electronic voting system infrastructure if fully implemented. So that gives me hope. I mean, right now, so in other words, without passing one more new law,
We got enough there.
we've got enough to get rid of these electronic voting systems right now.
Yeah, and Sheriff Darleaf is the Berry County Sheriff,
Yep,
as you mentioned, and he conducted an investigation with his team into the 2020 election, and specifically, as you mentioned, the voting machines that were used in the 2020 election, and forwarded information to Congress prior to the 2024 election, which could well have had a positive impact on the 2024 election,
yep.
if you will, as far as honesty and integrity.
Yeah, and I want to give hats off to attorney Stephanie Lambert. That's the one, she was Patrick Burns' attorney. That's how Sheriff Leaf got access to that data. She said, there's criminal activity here. I got to get it to law enforcement. She got it to Darleaf. So make sure that Steph gets some credit on that.
And as I have it, some of his findings were that Dominion, the machine, had remote in the company had remote access to tabulators during vote counts.
Yep,
That Dominion deliberately, and as our buddy Nick, the IT guru, says, log files don't lie. If you really want to know what's going on, go for the log files.
yep,
Darley found that Dominion deliberately removed log files from the election database required for the audit trail,
yep,
that Serbians and Canadians had administrative access to U.S. election systems,
yep,
and that the FBI Department of Justice at the time colluded with Dominion.
yep. And
And
I've
in
seen all
fact,
this.
they also colluded with the Colorado Secretary of State that led to the imprisonment of Tina Peters, who's still in prison, who all she was as election supervisor was doing her job. I mean, if tell
Exactly.
me if I have this wrong. She was doing it. She saw a problem.
Yep,
She not only she obtained the evidence, she reported it, and for her honesty and integrity, she was imprisoned. Do I have that
yep.
wrong?
Not just imprisoned, but made an example out of with a 9-year prison sentence.
Why is she
Um,
still there?
she's still there, and she's
Why is
that.
she still there? Why?
Well, first of all, it's tried in state court. If it was a federal court, I'm pretty sure Trump would have issued a pardon right now, and it's gone. Now, having said that, there is a path that's been identified that might be able to get her out, and it's through the federal government, and it is because the DOJ has issued a statement of interest in Tina's appeal of her sentencing, and this evidence that Dar has found can factor into that appeals process. And if it's determined that there was indeed a malicious prosecution activity and weaponization of government against Tina, which the evidence definitely supports, then there is a possibility that she could get her sentence commuted. So I'm not an expert on that, but it's plausible.
I want to touch on this, Pat. I was having a conversation the other day, and recently there was a court decision that said that in a case between someone who you mentioned, Mike Lindell, and look, um, we got to give Mike Lindell credit on a number of fronts. Number one, he does make the best pillows. As a guy
Yeah.
who has a horrible neck with terrible arthritis, it's the only pillow I've ever found. And I'm they're not a sponsor. I'm
We
not
got to
just
get you a promo code
it's
now.
well, I'm just telling you. As an orthopedic surgeon, I can tell you, his stuff is the best. Okay, as far as the pill. Now, that being said, he put it all on the line. This is a guy who could have kept selling pillows and sheets and everything else, and and having a nice, comfy life, but he didn't. And he brought in people to dissect the situation of, hey, just tell me what you got. What happened here? He's been demonized for doing it,
Yeah.
right? I mean, he's beyond been targeted. But there was what I believe was a frivolous lawsuit filed against him by
Hmm.
this Eric Coomer dude who was under the employ of Dominion. It is my understanding that there are actually emails that came out in the discovery process on a different case where Dominion is speaking in their internal emails about how votes could be flipped, right?
Yeah.
In their own machines. Okay.
Yeah.
So Comer sues Mike Lindell and My Pillow for what, slander, libel,
Defamation, yeah.
defamation? Okay. Well, the court decision just came through, and My Pillow, no, forget that. Get that out of here. They're fine. Goodbye. Leave them alone. But Mike Lindell had a judgment against him for some money,
Yeah.
which I'd quite.
440,000.
Can you give a what that? I mean, here we go again with the
Yeah.
legal system, judicial system, and all that hooey, and the judge and jury instructions and this and that and all that. How in the world, other than a judge telling a jury, you got to vote this guy, you got this guy is guilty. Okay, now you decide, but he's
Yeah.
guilty. Okay,
That's what she did.
can you
Yeah.
give us a little insight on that?
Yeah, effectively, here's the case in a nutshell. Mike Lindell was sued for saying in public what Eric Coomer was saying in private.
Right,
That's
right,
what he got sued. That's the simplest way of pursuing this. And
right.
when you actually look at the trial and you look at the lawsuit that was filed, there's over 150 samples of evidence provided in the initial filing. And out of those samples of evidence, 150 plus, um, only one had any derogatory remark by Mike Lindell about Eric Coomer. And I can tell you, Mike didn't know Eric Coomer from Boo Diddley from yeah, going until Eric Coomer decided to sue him, and so that was Mike's first real introduction into who Eric Coomer was. I think he was just repeating what another individual was saying at the time on the stage, and who was calling out Eric Coomer, and so Mike just parroted the name, right? So the burden or the standard for a civil trial, like defamation, is that the preponderance of evidence has to be in support of your claim, right? If you've got over 150 samples of evidence and only one deals with your actual claim, I don't know about you, Dave, but that doesn't seem like a preponderance to me.
No, it sure isn't.
So that when you couple it with the fact that here's the big picture, big takeaway on this. Um, Mike is the only one who said, I want to go to trial on this. And
Hmm.
by the way, I want it to be a jury trial.
Hmm.
All the rest of the folks subject to these frivolous lawsuits. And literally,
Awesome.
Eric Coomer has filed 26 of these lawsuits. I mean, he's a serial litigator. Um, Mike's the only one that said, you know what, we're going to trial. Everybody else settled. Fox News settled. Newsmax settled. All these other folks settled. Mike said, no, I want to hash this out. And so kudos to Mike.
Mhm.
And frankly, if it wasn't for, as you alluded to already, the judge's instructions to that effectively said it was kind of have you stopped beating your wife kind of analogy here, if you will, and said that he's guilty of defamation. Now you go off and figure out what the penalties are. Um, that's that's tilting. I mean, it's great grounds for appeal.
Mhm.
And it also, if you look at the jury instructions, they did not include one of the defense statements of fact in those jury instructions. It was all the plaintiff's assertions. And there's some pretty damning statements of fact revealed by the defense, including the fact that Coomer was revealed as having communicated with his brother, saying that, you know what, it's time to go shake the money tree. I won't say the pejorative, that blank clown and pillow guy, we're going to go off and sue him. And it highlights that his motivation was punitive. His motivation was malicious, not Mike's.
No, no.
Not Mike in any way, shape, or form. So that, and they wouldn't allow the body cam footage during the testimony of police officers who caught Eric Coomer after he ran his truck into the side of a building, and then he lied to police officers about the fact that he was driving the truck at the time, and which should point to his credibility for all of his assertions, right?
Yeah.
So no, it was not a fair trial. Mike's going to be appealing it, and when it all came down, boiled down, Mike was extremely happy that My Pillow was completely
Right.
exonerated because that enables advertisers to pick up My Pillow without risk of getting sued by another Eric Coomer, right? Um, and the other thing is that they wanted $60 million. They ended up getting a total of 2.3 million, 440,000 for Mike, for ostensibly for two statements. One we talked about in the initial filing, and one after Mike got the lawsuit filed on him. He wasn't too pleased with them at that point in time, right? So for two statements, It cost him $440,000, and it was talking about calling Coomer a treasonous individual, and he stands by that today. This isn't something that Mike was just throwing out there to get under people's skin. He was telling the truth because he honestly believes that, and I believe it too.
So, Pat, I hope this doesn't happen, but you get in an elevator and Anderson Cooper's in the elevator. All right?
Allison Cooper?
No, Anderson Cooper.
Oh, okay. No, I'm
Anderson
just
Cooper.
that's what President Trump calls
Anderson
him.
Cooper,
Yeah.
the CNN. And he looks at you and goes, "Yeah, you're this Senator Colbeck guy, and you're in this election integrity stuff." He goes, "Let me ask you something. Other than, let's say he knows about what Sheriff Darleaf found, that we already discussed. Okay, other than these findings from Sheriff Darleaf, and other than the fact that a professor from in computer science from the University of Michigan in an Atlanta courtroom hacked a voting machine from the 2020 election and flipped the results in front of a judge live. Other than that, what are a couple, two, three of the most important findings that the voting machines should never be used again in any election in this country or any country around the world?"
Well, my favorite, and I talk about this in my book, The 2020 Coup, is that when you actually look at the election night reports coming out out of the 2020 election, what you will see is a plot of the information that goes out to New York Times, et cetera, from an organization called Edison Research, and this is part of the big mystery on our elections, frankly, is how do you go from a ballot with a bunch of marks on it to the data that's streamed on the bottom of CNN's live broadcast. That's a big mystery to a lot of people. And frankly, even from somebody who's been studying as long as I have, there's still a lot of elements of this that are a mystery to me still. But one thing that wasn't a mystery was the fact that Edison Research was reporting out the cumulative vote tallies in the wake of the 2020 election. And what we were noticing is that they're always increasing, right? A
Mhm.
cumulative vote tally should only increase.
Right.
Well, at 5 o'clock in the morning,
Boop.
it went down to zero for both candidates. So the cumulative vote tally went down to zero and then popped back up again and resumed progress at a different slope for each of the candidates. Now, my background's in aerospace engineering. I've got lots of friends that are aerospace engineers and controls engineers. And for anybody familiar with controls analysis and design, there's a certain type of digital controller known as a PID controller, and it stands for proportional integrative derivative controller, and it has a signature mark on it, and that is when you change the set point, the cumulative variable that you're tracking drops down to zero, and then pops back up again. Well, this looked like there was a PID controller being used to manipulate the results of the election
And
coming
then
out
we
of
and then we put a new slope in.
Yes. And so that got me investigating, and I did let my, fingers type on the keyboard and decided, hey, is there any example of anybody using PID controllers to manipulate the results of elections? And certainly there was. And I found this white paper that was presented at a IEEE conference in 2010, and it was talking about how to optimize election outcomes using PID controllers.
Hmm.
And what was very interesting is that this white paper was put together by three professors from Chinese university called Guangdong University. And guess where this IEEE conference was? It was in a place you probably never ever heard of
I
before.
bet. Hey, wait, can I take a guess?
Yeah,
How about Wuhan?
yeah. What do you know? How'd
Whoa,
you ever hear about Wuhan?
whoa. Well,
No
that's where they
way.
drink. That's where they drink bat soup. That's how
Yeah,
this
yeah.
whole thing, this virus thing, got. Because Neanderthals were drinking bat soup in the wet market. Yeah. Okay.
So I would submit from the machine perspective, that's one that definitely deserves a little bit of an investigation, which is what ostensibly, per Trump's executive orders, is happening now. And as far as a mechanism to do that nationwide, I mean, because states fundamentally manage all of our elections, right? It's all local to the state, except thanks to the folks out at the E.I. Isaac Center and their buddies at the Center for Internet Security, who have provided wiretaps in all 50 states using what are called Albert sensors. And so essentially, they are tapping into the data stream for election records, everything from our voter rolls, voting history, poll book data, to the election results themselves. And they had access to all of that before anybody else did, and they had access to it in decrypted fashion. So they were ostensibly there to prevent any outside intrusions, but there's not much of a better way to
Yeah.
subvert the integrity of elections if you are inside the Trojan horse, trusted inside the walls of Troy, and able to manipulate results however you see fit. And when you look at the people that are involved with the Center for Internet Security, it's all the who's who of the intel community, like the 51 people that signed that letter about Hunter Biden's laptop.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy to see fingerprints of fraud and an op going on regarding our election. So that's for me is one of the more egregious thing. And then I got some eyewitness examples of why I'm concerned with the electronic voting system. I was actually a certified poll challenger
Yes,
in
you were.
Detroit.
You were.
And I'm also a certified Microsoft small business specialist. And I was observing then all the tabulators throughout the night while they're tabulating votes. All these machines are connected to the internet. They denied it at the
No,
time,
they're not.
which,
No, 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 no. They're never connected to the internet.
yeah,
No, no.
yeah.
We got to get you some
Well,
glasses.
yeah, they've given up on fighting that one now because I mean, even our Michigan Secretary of State up has a website that points all the clerks to a website for Connected Nation, saying that if you're having trouble connected to the internet, talk to our service providers at Connected Nation.
Yeah.
So it's not a mystery, and when you couple it with these Albert sensors, and I've got signed agreements for communities like Wayne County where they are not hiding the fact that they're connected to the internet. Matter of fact, I actually, as a certified poll challenger in the 2022 primary, decided I wanted to monitor how they were tabulating the votes at the county level, and they wouldn't let me in there. And but I could hear that they were uploading election results from all the communities. I could scan on my phone where the election results were, and I knew that the election results were coming in from communities that hadn't yet brought in their little flash drives, which is their default narrative, saying no, 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 it's all offline. You just plug in a flash drive and upload. Bullpucky. I actually had to sue for the surveillance video. They wouldn't give it to me, but it proves everything that I was talking about. So no, these guys are liars. And if you want the best evidence of what that the 2020 election was stolen, go back to something we alluded to earlier, is that we are the ones advocating for transparency.
That's right.
We're saying open up the books,
Yeah.
show us all your cards, turn them face up. And what they're doing is playing a game of three card monte on us and not letting us see their cards. And that alone should indicate that something's rotten in Denmark.
Pat, in your heart of hearts, do you believe we will ever get an answer to
Yeah.
2020?
Oh,
You do.
yeah. I I'm very confident we're going to get an answer. I think there's some good people in charge right now that are not going to stop until they get that answer. And I'm frankly already seeing examples of the only thing that can get in our way right now is the human condition. I don't want any more of these kerfuffles like between Elon and Donald Trump or anything like that. We can't stand any more of those. I just want to get everybody focused on the mission and executing.
So, Pat, you submitted a congressional. You had a congressional briefing, right, in
Yeah.
2024, federal, right? And there was something that in that congressional briefing I want you to address where we are. You said the following. I think probably still undoubtedly still holds true today. The core issues resulting in the subversion of the integrity of our elections are as follows: machine vulnerabilities, media misinformation, disinformation, non-government organizations, chain of custody, money laundering, FBI cover-ups, enforcement of statutes already on the books, and seditious conspiracy. It's a pretty big sandwich to eat.
It is. It's tough to get your arms around. And I still remember those first couple days after the 2020 election when I started talking about what I had witnessed
Yeah.
firsthand, the connectivity to the internet of the machines, the 3:30 a.m. drop of ballots without any chain of custody, the pizza boxes up on the window. And that led to a floodgate of information coming into me and others. And it was very difficult to go from a cold start, if you will, and try to organize all that information into a cogent kind of a concept of operations in military parlance as to how they executed this op. And so, yeah, it's a lot to get your arms around, and there's still stuff coming out there to this day. But this is the one thing that I think has ideally suited me and my background for this endeavor is that my background is that of a systems engineer.
Mhm.
If I drill down on any given topic, I'm not the expert on that. But what I do is put together an architecture, a framework that allows me to knit together all those different components into an integrated view or integrated concept of how things work. And that's what's been required up until this point. And so it's like I said, we got many parts, one body. Everybody has a different role to play, and I'm doing my best to knit together all the findings from everybody else and make sure they get the credit that they deserve, and get it out to folks. In the meantime, we're just pressing forward now, and for folks like me in Michigan, we don't have any prosecutorial path here in the state of Michigan. I mean, I've tried.
Yeah, I know.
I've got together with three former Michigan state reps and myself as a former state senator. We filed a criminal complaint with the Michigan Attorney General, with the Michigan State Police, with the Michigan Secretary of the Senate about perjury that we believe was committed by Dominion CEO John Polis while under oath on December 15, 2020, before the Michigan Senate Oversight Committee. We've got at least 15 counts of criminal perjury that we wanted them to investigate.
Nah,
Well, they didn't investigate it, right? And
he had a
they
bad
said
day.
they did.
He had a bad day.
Yeah. The Attorney General actually came back
Oh,
5 business days after we sent her a 51-page criminal complaint, complete with evidence, and said that she'd performed a thorough investigation. Well, I followed up on that request, or that with a FOIA request. I wanted to see her investigative report for this thorough investigation. There is no report.
no.
And so then I followed up with, show me all your communications. Maybe it was just a carefully cobbled together set of email messages that led you to the conclusion that it was a thorough investigation. No, their only email communications were how to address the press fallout of us calling out this criminal complaint. But here's the reason for hope is that, all right, we're shut down at the state level from any justice whatsoever.
The feds.
Matter of fact, if you go up to the Michigan Attorney General's web page and you say, I'm search for complaint directories and you type in election fraud, it pops back, uh-oh, we can't find anything. So you can't even file a complaint against election fraud. But we have friends now in the Department of Justice,
Yeah.
and I can tell you that they now have that same criminal complaint with the state statutes that were violated, substituted with federal statutes that were violated. And now they are equipped with all the information. So our information doesn't die, it just keeps growing and keeps getting more compelling with every passing day. And now we've got friends in the federal government that are actively working on it.
So we have an election coming up in 2026, Pat.
Yeah, I heard about that. Yeah.
Yeah, right. We still gonna have machines?
Yeah. We'll know by the end of this year whether or not we'll have machines or not. If we still have machines after this year, then I would submit we need to be wary. In states like Michigan, we conduct a complete reset on our whole state government in 2026. So I know there's a big deal going on with control of the House and control of the Senate up at the federal level. But in Michigan, it's compelling from the standpoint that we've got literally the governor, the attorney general, secretary of state, control of the House, control of the Senate are all up for grabs in this upcoming election. Plus, they've got another suite of garbage constitutional amendments that we don't want to get move forward at all. So, yeah, it's a big deal. But let me put it this way: I am more hopeful than ever that we'll have the machines gone in time for that election. But we still gotta convert that hope into action.
Pat, final question. You've been doing this for years, even before the 2020 election. You were talking about the integrity elections for while you were in the state senate for years before that. Of course,
Yeah,
nobody
yeah.
wanted to hear about it, right? Um, on your level of if let's do a level of optimism, right? And obviously, optimism comes and wait. It's a sine wave, right? It's up, it's down, it's up, it's down. Where are you on that level of optimism based on what you know and you can speak about publicly and what you know that you cannot speak about publicly? Where are we on Pat Colbeck's level of optimism? If 10 is, oh man, this is a certainty, and
Yeah,
0 is, forget it, we're screwed.
9 out of 10.
Boom.
Yep, I'm very optimistic on that front. So I'm naturally optimistic, but I'll tell you, at the top of my Twitter feed has been Psalm 37 for the last 2 years, and it effectively says that don't fret when evil people succeed in their ways, for the righteous will inherit the land. And I'm 100% confident of the truth of that statement. And so um, I we're going to find out whether or not the timing on that is going to be for the 2026 election by the end of this year, but I'm very optimistic.
Pat Colbeck, how can folks follow you 24/7?
Well, you can follow me out at the Election Crime Bureau with Mike Lindell, so electioncrimebureau.com. And then probably the best way to keep up to date on the latest developments is just follow me on Twitter at P for Patrick, J as in John, Colbeck, Colbeck. That's my X handle, PJ Colbeck, and do my best to keep people informed there.
Senator Pat Colbeck, I'd like to thank you for everything, not just what you have done, but what you are doing and what you will do. You're an incredible credit to our country. And I thank you for your tireless efforts on behalf of every person in our country and, frankly, every person in the world. You're a phenomenal person.
Oh, thank you, my friend David. You're on the front line too with getting the information out. Remember that Hunter Biden laptop and
Yeah.
the impact of that disinfo. So I know what it costs people to get the word out, and you've been fearless on that front. So thank you.
Always happy to stick my finger in the eye of the deep state and hold my hand up for freedom, as you are.
Amen.
I thank you, Pat, and I thank you folks for joining us. Please network this interview because 99% of the people that you know and love have no clue what we just talked about for the past hour. True. Network it, empower people, educate people. That's what this is about. Until next time, Dave Janda signing off. Dream big and dare to fail. Thanks for your time today.